Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. I'm back with my one co-host here, Nick Olson. Nick, it's been a minute since we've had a chance to talk. You're back. Football's back, baby. We got, preseason week 1 in the books. We were able to grind some tape again. It feels good to be back here, man. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm back, baby. I had a friend bug me and was like, "Are you ever gonna do Kindred Skulls again, Nick? Are you like retired?" And I was like, "No." I thought about it, but then the All 22, I got the access to it, and I can't stop myself from when you got guys like Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, putting guys into the dirt. That's just fun to do. So. It was honestly good to like have some preseason. I know it's preseason all 22. It's guys who like the last quarter is entirely dudes who are not making the roster. But it's still, I don't know. I think it's still, it's really fun schematically seeing a Flores defense and starting to understand what that's going to look like offensively. Seeing the personnel groupings they're throwing out there, a little bit of they mixed in a little bit more duo than I'm used to. So I'm excited to like nerd out over football again.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. I mean, especially the first half of the game where you get to see the guys who are really the big competitors for the roster spots, right? Like I released a 53-man roster for zone coverage before training camp, and I think I'd make a few changes to it after what we've learned, over the training camp process. But also after week 1, there are some guys who really showed out who I kind of left off the team in that scenario. So I'm kind of excited to go in some of our top performers, some of the overall thoughts. But let's jump into that Flores defense, right? I think that's the biggest news for the Vikings this offseason in general. I mean, obviously, adding a player like Jordan Addison is exciting, but we have a complete overhaul of a defensive scheme change. So I'm interested to hear from you, Nick, like, what were your initial impressions? Because I've got, I've done a lot of work on the Flores scheme. Like, how different do you feel like this is from Ed Donatel just at a glance?
I mean, it's about as different as you could get in so many different ways. There's some similarities in some of the fronts that they used, but even there, like the back seven is just night and day different. The personnel that they throw out there, night and day different. I mean, we saw three safeties, we saw dime backs, we saw a lot of blitzing, we saw the cover one as kind of the base. Single high coverage is kind of like that's the it's like a total attack mentality, whereas Donatel, the Fangio scheme is entirely like we're gonna have zones and we're gonna give you the easy stuff, but we're gonna let you react to us. It's so very different, and I was pleased to see that at least I mean preseason a lot of coaches don't give away their secret sauce or anything. I didn't think Flores got that crazy with like his blitz calls or anything, but the basic coverage concepts were kind of what I was expecting. It was a lot of cover one. You did sprinkle in a lot of cover three, but like it felt like they kind of based out of a single high coverage with man match or zone match concepts. They did mix in some cover two, some cover six, cover eight, if we're still calling it that, even though we're outside of Fangio land now. At quarters. So we saw like we got a good mix of everything, but so much more press. Guys are closer to the line. Guys are in attack mentality. Guys are in trail technique. They're not just sort of like 8 yards off the line of scrimmage all the time, waiting to react to stuff. And the blitz packages were so much more aggressive. They're sending five guys so often.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of this base mentality that we have five defensive linemen, and we're sending all five. A very different mentality. And then the usage of the linebackers is completely different. A lot of 5-1 fronts or 5-2 fronts, or they'll have 5-1 and then three safeties or something. And Cine would be like like a linebacker safety hybrid. The way they would use him, sometimes bring him down into a hook zone or into the box, and sometimes drop him back. So it was not all that different from the way Flores ran things in Miami, but I thought that was a really good thing and a really exciting thing. And it made me really optimistic, actually, about this defense because I've been feeling very pessimistic about the lack of talent on the defense, the guys they lost. They're starting so many rookies or so many new guys, a lot of turnover. But the way they turned out and the way the defense looked, it got me excited because I can kind of see when it looks bad, you're going to see the explosives given up. There's going to be bad times, but when it all clicks, it's a very feisty, aggressive, fun defense to watch. So I'm hyped for that.
Yeah,
What do you think?
there was a lot of interesting stuff on defense. I think one of the things you hit on is the 5-man fronts, right, where you have five guys on the line of scrimmage, and that seemed to be the base. And they were running that out of, I would say big nickel personnel, right, is what they used relatively frequently, or just their standard nickel personnel. So they'd have 5 defensive backs on the field, and then they'd have 4 quote unquote, I'll call for a 4 defensive lineman with a true off ball linebacker who's walked up kind of on the ball as either the weak side, as either the Will or the Sam, based on what kind of front that they had. Sometimes they put him to the tight end, sometimes they put him away from the tight end. But it was like Troy Reader on the first snap of the game, right, was on the line of scrimmage. He was an off ball linebacker. Luiji Vilain was the other edge rusher across the line of scrimmage from him. They did that with Troy Dye too. I didn't see Ivan Pace in that role, which I think is fine. I mean, we're gonna get to Ivan Pace here in a little bit, but he played primarily off ball, Mike linebacker or Mac linebacker, depending on the terminology, depending on the fronts. It all gets mixed up what you call it. But I thought the front was probably one of the more interesting things that we saw. We didn't get too crazy with the coverages, right? There was a lot of man coverage. We're gonna expect to see that from the Flores defense. There was a lot of cover 3. There were a couple too high shells, which I think were like cover 6 shells. So we saw a wide variety of coverages, and he will run every coverage, but we're going to major in cover 1 and cover 3, right? And that cover 3 is going to be more of a mix-up than a primary thing that we want to do on the defense, right? You can't just line up and play man coverage every play. Opposing teams have beaters when they see you in man coverage, so you got to mix in a little bit of zone to try to help, especially on crossing routes and that sort of thing. But with the fronts, I thought they did some interesting things with the positions, right? Like, I saw Patrick Jones lined up as a 3 technique in a bear front, right? Where we had a nose tackle, 2 3 techniques, and then 2 wide 9s, which were Vilain and probably Reader on that specific play. That seems to be the same role that Asezio Tomewo is playing, which also seems to be the same role that Marcus Davenport is playing from camp reports and that sort of thing. So it kind of sounds like Patrick Jones, Marcus Davenport, Asezi are kind of in the same track on the defense, whereas, the Luiji Vilain, who DJ Wanham and Danielle Hunter both sat, they're probably on the same track in the defense, right? So you're going to have a little bit of different flavor from each of your edge rushers on this defense. I thought that was pretty interesting. Obviously, we didn't get to see, Harrison Phillips, Dean Lowry, kind of what their roles would be, because I would imagine that 5 technique, that 3 technique in a bear front is going to be more like Phillips and Lowry, with Kairos Tonga as the nose tackle, at least according to their depth chart. Kairos Tonga is the nose tackle. Who knows what they're actually going to put out there on the field, right? Once we get to the regular season, we can't trust the Vikings' real depth chart, but they're it's just a media thing right now. But I thought those personnels were interesting. I thought the stunts were super fun. Like, I think that's where we were seeing a lot of the pressure that, and to Donatel's credit, last year, with Zadarius Smith, he did a lot of fun things in the pass rush game, right? But it was so bland outside of that, and so bland on early downs. We really needed to wait to get until 3rd down until he wanted to do the fun stuff. Flores is willing to do that on any down. He's willing to run these stunts on any play, and a couple of them were very successful. So I was really happy to see all of those changes. And like you said, there's still more that hasn't been revealed, right? There's a couple packages he has. Charger, which is their double A-gap mug. There's Bengal is the package where they put all their guys on the line of scrimmage and they blitz 8 guys against a 7-man protection, so you're guaranteed to have one free. I think that's Bengal Hawk specifically. But, so there's a couple packages that we haven't even seen, right? There were some snaps of, like, Ivan Pace walked up in the B gap, off-ball linebackers walked up. That's the 5-0 diamond sub-Mac O packages. That stuff we used in this game, but and that stuff I expect to see quite a bit, but the really special, unique designer blitzes we haven't seen yet. So it's just exciting that we got to see a lot of pressure from the Vikings defense in this game. We got to see a lot of situations where the quarterback had to hold on to the ball for a beat longer and was able to be pressured, which is not something we were used to seeing from the Vikings defense last year. So it was exciting that we got to see all that in the preseason. And then also, there's still more to come down the pipeline. So I really like that juxtaposition there. So that's the Flores defense. We kind of went over a little bit of what they're doing. I mean, it's, like we said, it's relatively vanilla. They're not going to get too in depth in the preseason game. But let's go to players on the defensive side of the ball now. And I think the first person we have to talk about, the person everybody's raving about, is, undrafted free agent Ivan Pace Jr. out of Cincinnati. He started the game at middle linebacker. He wore the green dot. He called the signals for the game. What did you see out of Ivan Pace, Nick?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty unheard of to have not just a rookie but an undrafted rookie starting with the first team and wearing the green dot. Taking the calls from the sideline, getting everybody lined up. I think that speaks not just to say whatever you want about his on-field play, which is really impressive. The fact that he also has the playbook down so well already by
Mm-hmm.
preseason week one as a rookie. That speaks a lot to just what a good high football character player he is. He was feisty. I really like him. He's a lot of fun to watch because he plays with his hair on fire.
Yep.
Um, I used to associate that with like Eric Kendricks, but this was like a whole nother level of like insanity. Like he's just screaming downhill all the time. He blitzed well. I thought he was very explosive. He is short, so he's a little
Mm-hmm.
undersized. He's not like he doesn't lack muscle. I would say he's short and stout, like a little teapot, but he wallops. He's a lot of those tiny guys. I kind of maybe this is my own bias, but I don't like seeing so many tiny linebackers because I worry about them getting destroyed in run fits. But that's not Ivan Pace. He may be small, but he relishes contact and he will wallop guys. I think everybody by now has seen that clip of him just like hammering the Seahawks right guard, triggering downhill on a run fit and managing to make a shoestring tackle at the line of scrimmage through an offensive lineman. And he was doing that all game, like
Yeah.
bringing on contact, lowering the shoulder into guys who weigh literally 100 pounds more than him, and just sort of initiating contact and being able to use sort of his natural low leverage and the fact that he may be lighter, but he runs really fast. So forces mass times or what's the
Acceleration,
formula?
mass
Forces
times acceleration. And
acceleration. So
to be clear,
what he lacks in mass, he makes up for in acceleration. So
to be
he
clear,
packs a punch, man.
he's 5'10", but he weighed in at the combine at 230, right? Eric Kendricks was probably like 238 when he came in and 6 foot. So, the density is there for Pace, like you're saying. Like the density is very clearly there. And he plays at an NFL weight these days. I think 230 is an entirely reasonable weight for a linebacker. It's just the height isn't
Yeah.
quite there, which is weird.
There was one time where there was a play action play where I wouldn't say he looked lost, but he triggered downhill a little bit on the play action, not like over triggered or
Yep.
anything. And then the ball went above his head because he started backpedaling back and then was like, okay, where do I need to get to my landmark in my hook zone? And by that time, it was like I think a dagger concept, and the crossing route was the deep over had gone over him. So he may be. I don't know how they teach him if they want him to robot to man match behind with the guy behind him, or just to backpedal back and watch the quarterback. It
Yeah.
seems
So
like it would be more of the latter. But
my
other than that,
understanding
I thought
my
just to
understanding
put
of
a
that
bone.
play specifically was I thought that Pace should have roboted back harder. Like he took 2 to 3 steps up towards the play fake, which is what you're supposed to do. And then he was kind of lackadaisical in his turn. There was a play later in the game where he did a lot better job hitting that, seeing the play action wasn't there, and immediately getting out of there and finding a crosser. So I think that was maybe more of a teachable moment for him, right, where he just wasn't getting out far enough to find that crosser. And I kind of think that this is the play where it was a deep route and loose Cine stayed deep with I think it was like a Yankee concept. You had a deep over coming from the other side of the field, and then you had a post route on the main side of the field. And really, Cine should have nailed that. Like, Pace is only responsible for carrying it so far across the field. Cine should have gotten it by the time it got to the sideline, which is where the ball ended up. But they both could have done a better job, I would say, on that play.
Yeah, and I don't want to hammer home that play too much on Pace because one, you're right. I would put it's more Scene's fault, not necessarily like you want your hook guy to get depth, but you don't want to give him that much depth, so it's not really his fault out of his zone. But I also think like that's just one play, and on the rest of the plays, I was really surprised by how comfortable he looked in coverage. So I think he's obviously he's got the athletic ability to match with guys, tight ends at least, to be like a safety, I guess, in coverage, manning up against guys. And I thought he looked comfortable dropping back to his zones on other plays too. So overall, I thought he had not a perfect game, but I was really impressed by what he brought to the table, and I'm not surprised at all with the buzz that he's been getting in camp, and the fact that he was wearing the green dot too. I think it shows you this is not somebody just an undrafted free agent fighting for a roster spot. I think he's in the argument to start game one with the Vikings. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I think there's a couple things to go from there. His ability to take on offensive linemen was something that you regularly saw in college, right? Like in his role at Cincinnati, it was kind of a weird role because he was an off-ball linebacker, but he was a lot closer to the line of scrimmage. He was like a yard or two closer, where normal linebackers are probably at like 5 yards of depth. He was at like 3 yards of depth in front of the linemen, and a lot of times they'd have three down linemen, right? And he'd be rushing the passer on most plays or playing QB spy if he was in coverage. So he had to immediately take on opposing offensive linemen. The thing is, that's the AAC, right? That's the American, and a lot of those linemen, frankly, aren't high level players, right? So it's a little different when you're undersized and you're going up against guys in the group of five, right, in college football versus going up against NFL offensive linemen. And nobody on the Seahawks, it was all their backup offensive linemen. I don't think any of the Seahawks backup offensive linemen are particularly impressive, right, in terms of who they are as players, but it's still something that translated from, where he was in college to the NFL level where he's still dominating linemen like he was, right? Because that throwing the guard into the running back to make the tackle, that's like some 350-pound nose tackle kind of stuff that you're doing there, right? That's some freak of nature strength kind of stuff, and he's able to do it at his size. There were a couple other reps where he directly took on linemen. There were a couple reps where he slid blocks from linemen, just slithered around the blocks, got there very quickly, and tried to make a play. So overall, I thought it was really impressive, just his ability to take on blocks, which was a huge question mark that I had for him because of his lack of size, right? Because of that relative lack of size and coming up from a lower level of competition in college football. Obviously, Cincinnati's a really good school in terms of college football. They're moving to the Big 12, I think, but there's a reason they dominated that conference, right? It's because they had more talent than everybody else did in the conference. So I like that a lot. Rushing the passer, like, we didn't get a ton of reps. There was one rep where I think he read it very well, where Troy Reader actually should have peeled off, and it ended up being a throw to the flat and the running back. And Pace initially had responsibility for the running back in man coverage, but it was a play action fake. And the way the Flores defense works, you have there are a couple different names for it, but the one in the Belichick playbook that I saw is called train, where you have an outside linebacker, on the line of scrimmage, and if the running back's man coverage responsibility is the middle linebacker, but if the running back releases to that side, it's that linebacker's responsibility. So the running back released to that side, Reader should have peeled off. Pace sees the play action, takes a couple steps forward, as you're taught to do against play action as a linebacker, sees the running backs going out to where Reader's supposed to be, and then beelines it for the quarterback. He got a pressure on Locke, but Locke was able to complete the pass because Reader didn't peel off in time to hit the running back, right? Like, that sort of reading and reacting and just going from Pace is something, again, you saw from him in college, and he doesn't appear to be slowed down from it at the NFL level. Like, I'd rather him, and maybe I have it wrong, and he was supposed to cover the running back in that. I don't think I do, but, I'm not the coach. I'm not calling the defense, so I don't really know. But I'd rather him be fast and wrong than, be hesitant and mix it up still, or be hesitant and be late over to that running back, or be late and not affect the quarterback at all. So I liked seeing that from him. I do think he does need to get a little bit better reading play action, on addition to the one where we were talking about he was sluggish into his robot. He also had one where it was another play action fake. This was actually the first play of the game where Cine had that great hit on the slider. There was a wide receiver. It was Jake Bobo, the guy who eventually caught the touchdown, who came out and feigned like he was blocking him. And you could actually see the reactions of Cine, who had that situation against a tight end, and Pace. Pace went to put his arms up and take on the block when the guy was clearly kind of ducking underneath him. And what he should have done is reacted to that and followed the guy across the field, because that was his responsibility to follow that player. Instead, he's prepared to take on the block, realizes that when the block, it's kind of like defending a screen, right? If you're a defensive lineman, realizes that the block isn't going to come, and then, oh crap, he's late to the crosser across the field. Whereas Cine sees the tight end coming towards him, notices a slight movement by the tight end where he's moving away from Cine's path, and immediately sees Jackson Smith-Njigba coming across as a slider across the field, and makes a beeline for that and made a great hit on, that great tackle on his first play. So there's a couple juxtapositions there I'd like to see Pace improve on, but the starters in this game didn't play, right? Jordan Hicks and Brian Asamoah didn't play in terms of our off-ball linebacker starters. So I think, we're in really good shape with Pace if he's, a rotational player, right? I think he's got the chops to play on an NFL field right now, which is very, I think, pretty strange to say from an undrafted free agent. If you realize that really, Pace probably could have gone in the third or fourth round if it wasn't for the size questions. And once the size questions are answered, I think he can play on the field right away, frankly. It's honestly impressive.
Yeah, he's a great player. That's like 20 minutes more than I thought we'd be talking about him, but he's the star of the camp right now. So
Yeah.
I think he's a shoe-in for Mr. Mankato, and I think it's honestly, I was feeling pretty down about our linebackers because Asamoah is such a question. Like, I liked the flashes of Asamoah last year, and Jordan Hicks I don't like. I did not
No.
agree with them keeping Hicks over Kendricks, but I get it that they can't have everybody made out of 200 pounds and feistiness. So I get they got to have some bigger backs, but I was a little down in it. But Ivan Pace's emergence, I think, is really exciting, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I think it'd be more interesting to see Pace on the field than Hicks at this point. So we'll see which ones end up with the starting jobs when we get to
one
it.
other thing, I did see the size show up one time. There was a crossing route over the middle, and it ended up being high regardless. Like, the receiver couldn't reel it in because it was too high, but Pace was underneath it, and he jumped to try to tip it. Like, if he was 6'3", and he's only got 30-inch arms, if he was 6'3" with like 32 or 33-inch arms, he would have tipped that pass at the very least, if not intercepting it. So I guess the height might show up in the passing game if he's trying to stay underneath zones, but we'll see how that progresses.
It's more of a problem for a Donatel defense where you're just letting guys
Yeah,
clog passing lanes. Pace
yeah,
Pace is at his best if you shoot him, fire him at something, point
exactly.
him to the ball, let him go.
Yeah, he's a guided missile. So let's talk about another guy who stood out for me, who's kind of fighting for a roster spot, is Luiji Vilain, who's the outside linebacker. As I mentioned before, we seem to have like a heavy defensive end, like a strong defensive end, and that'd be the Davenports, the Patrick Joneses, and then we have more of the pass rush defensive end. Your Daniil Hunters, DJ Wanham, Luiji Vilain. And Vilain, obviously, with Wanham and Hunter sitting, is third on that list, but I thought he had a really impressive performance in this game from my eyes. He got a sack fumble, which I was kind of surprised was called a fumble, but I guess it got knocked out of Locke's hand and then picked up by a running back. But he had a couple inside moves that were nice. He seemed very explosive off the ball, right, as a pass rusher, and then was able to get inside moves and kind of work his way to the quarterback in multiple occasions. So I was just impressed with him. Did you have anything more specific on Vilain, or you want to move on?
A few things impressed me with him. One was the diversity of tools in his pass rush toolkit. He had a nice long arm that I saw. He's very bendy,
Yeah.
which I thought there was one stunt where he was a little sluggish, but there was another one where he's like, man, this guy moves really well. There's another pressure that he got where Locke actually I thought had an impressive game, and one of the things that impressed me was his pocket presence. I think there were a lot of pressures that were not converted because of how he was moving back there. One of those examples I think was he bent the arc really really well and just wasn't able to get home with it. So I liked his tools, and I think he's more developed than I was expecting him to be at this stage, because he's threw out a long arm. He had like an inside swipe counter. He had a spin move. Actually, the spin move was pretty bad, so I wouldn't necessarily throw that one out there. But it's nice that he actually is willing to bust that out, and he's able to convert some speed to power. And he's got like a push-pull counter too. The other thing that really stuck out with me, at least as a pass rusher, is he doesn't like quit on reps. He like keeps going. PFF had him with the most pressures on the team, and I think some of those were like cleanup stuff. But I think there were a lot of plays where basically everybody is like sort of stopped in their tracks. But Vilain's always the one who's like, I'm not giving up. I'm going to continue
Hmm.
to give you my third move, my fourth move, and eventually he can give him enough time and he'll win the rep. So I like that about him. I will say he struggled in his run fits a little bit. I don't. So I wouldn't love seeing him out there as like the rotational guy to Spill Hunter. But I would like to see him make the roster and be active as a rotational pass rusher because I do think he can bring some juice, and that stood out to me. So that made me excited about him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's one of those players who I kind of struggle with whether or not he's going to make the 53-man roster or whether I want him to make the 53-man roster. But this was one in the positive category for him, right? It's like there were a few players, and we'll get to a couple more of them later, who I had off my initial 53-man roster, and it's like I really just want to expand this roster like 3 or 4 more spots just to keep all the guys I like on them. So why don't we go back to our first round draft pick from last season, Lewis Cine. He got some action. He got a lot of action. Actually, played like the second or third most snaps on the team. On the defense, at least from this game, we saw him as a cover 3 safety. We saw him coming down in the box. As a cover 3 single high safety, we saw him coming down in the box. We didn't, he's not playing the Josh Metellus role. Like the Josh Metellus role is kind of that big nickel safety where he's in man coverage or he's purely in the box. But it's more of a true cover 3 versatile safety where Cine can play deep or he's asked to come down in the box. And go ahead with Cine, Nick. What do you what are your thoughts on him?
The thing that really popped off the tape for me was he felt like in a completely different athletic skill set than
Yes.
the other 21 players on the field. Like his close ability is just elite. Like he flies across the screen and across the field. So that was really impressive, and I think that showed up not just on that early play where he made the tackle, the sort of wrap up tackle in the flat for like what should have been like an 8-yard gain and turned into a 2-yard gain because he saw it so quickly and closed on it so quickly. But I mean, the Seahawks were doing a lot of that boot stuff, a lot of the pull out, a lot of the sort of split zone that becomes like the throw to the tight end in the flat. So, and he was closing in on a lot of that stuff. I think, we talked about that mistake that we both think he made in that sort of cover 3 dagger play where he didn't drive on, he didn't nail the crosser when he should have. So it wasn't necessarily perfect, and so I guess I have some questions about how I'd feel about him executing his responsibilities, which is important when you're like the safety, especially in those zones. But his potential and his skill set continue to really impress me. I think he got dinged a little bit by like the tackles, and
Oh
there were
yeah.
a lot of times where he was met in the hole with was it Charbonnet
Yep.
who was sort of bruising into him. But like at the end of the day, I think except for one, maybe two occasions, I think he always made the tackle, or the rest of the team rallied around him. So there was some good and some bad with his tackles, but I guess I thought the ones that he made, they weren't always pretty, but the guy got on the ground eventually. So I wasn't too I guess I didn't dig him too much for his tackling ability, and I saw a lot of good there too. So I guess I maybe he's not fully baked yet, but I am excited and I see the flashes and I see the potential. I'm thinking of him still kind of this is like his rookie season because he missed so much time last year. So from the perspective of somebody who I think of as a rookie, I think he's got a very, very high ceiling, and I see him developing towards it. And I still have some question marks, and I maybe wouldn't press him to play early. I don't think you need to throw him into the fire when you got guys like Harrison Smith in front of him. But I am still very excited about what he brings to the table, especially not just the skill set, but also like the potential for him to start putting it together. So I guess an up and down game, but I think more positives and especially a long term makes things that make me excited to see him and why you would draft him in the first round. What do you think of Scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely areas for improvement, right? And I love his ability coming forward. I think that is the key that we saw. I mean, you might have referenced it, but there was one play where the Seahawks, he was the safety to the right side of the field, right? And the Seahawks were running wide to the left. and he comes screaming across the field and hits the running back. I don't think, maybe he missed the tackle on that play as well, and he's always stopped the guy to rally and tackle, but his tackling form's just terrible, right? Like
Yeah,
he's coming
he
in
doesn't
way
wrap.
too high against guys, and that can lead to, some helmet to helmet hits where you're getting high impacts and you're probably going to get a concussion too. So I'd really like to see him clean that up and actually break down and wrap up and tackle guys rather than kind of go for the big hit, which is kind of what he was known for in college. So it doesn't shock me that he's trying to do it. It's just, and a couple of these tackle attempts were against Charbonnet, who's like a very stout player, right? And he was a very stout player in college as well. But it's just not going to get it done when you're 6'2" and less than 200 pounds, which is what Cine is. Like, he looks small out there. He looks skinny out there. So that's definitely part of a concern to me. And then I thought he was hesitant on the back end, right? Like, we talked about that play where he should have nailed down on it. You got to trust what you're reading and seeing when you're in coverage. And I'm not sure he was all the way there. Like, I thought he was good in the underneath zones, and then the deep zones are kind of where he needed to help his anticipation. There was the first touchdown that the Seahawks had. I don't put this on Cine, because I think it was cover one robber, and Jay Ward should have come over and helped. I think it was
Yeah,
Mekhi Blackman in coverage. Um,
yeah.
but Cine was also kind of in no man's land. Like, he was like 6 to 7 yards back in the end zone. You had a 3-by-1 formation. The other two wide receivers ran short routes on that play. So he was kind of in the middle of nowhere. I would have liked to see him react a little bit more quickly to what's going on in front of him, and not necessarily need to play so deep in that situation. Um, so, and maybe that's just, they're trying to execute what's taught or whatever, and that's a little bit, but you'd like to see him play more up to game speed. To your point, he missed a ton of time last year, right? He wasn't able to get on the practice field much after, week 3, right? Because he's rehabbing his leg injury the whole time. You're not getting the live reps, and maybe that's something he needs in this defense. It sounds like we've gotten similar reports from camp to how he played in the game, which is promising, like great flashes. Like, you probably saw the video going around of him making that ridiculous, interception where he basically buzzed the flat, right? And he came from absolutely nowhere as a crazy diving reception. Those plays coming forward felt like that play, and then there was some inconsistency behind it. Fortunately for him, I do think Bynum and Harrison Smith are going to be your main starters, and Josh Metellus is going to play that kind of big nickel role. So I don't think he's going to need to see the field, but hopefully he's able to develop in this defense and then take over for one of those players as they leave to try to get a contract or some other situation, Harrison Smith retiring or what have you. So promising, but still kind of a question mark, and that leads to question marks for a player who's a first round draft pick in year 2, right? I think it's natural to have those, but I'm hopeful that he will be able to progress from where he's at. So with that on Cine, are there any other players on the defense that you wanted to touch on? I've got one or two guys, but go for it.
I mean, I had notes on all of them pretty much, but the
Sure.
cornerbacks kind of stick out the most interesting for me to talk about. Like Blackman, he did give up that touchdown. I don't begrudge the touchdown that he gave up because he was in really good position, and that was a throw on a frozen rope from Drew Lock there, and
Mm-hmm.
like just a perfect throw. I guess he just has to get his arm up just a split second earlier. Although he did commit pass interference there, grabbing the guy at the top of the route. So he is very handsy, and that's something that we knew he'd have to work on. So not surprised to see him called for that. But that's to get the negatives out of the way because I thought Blackman had a really impressive game, and I like how sticky he is in coverage. I like how feisty he is in press coverage. He smothered out a slot fade really early on that went to nowhere. It probably, if it weren't overthrown, he probably could have had an interception opportunity there because he just completely stacked the receiver the whole way through. So, and that to do that from the slot position where you're defending both sides and you don't really necessarily have safety help or leverage help, you got to defend the two-way go. That's really impressive to be able to do. So I liked his movement skills. I thought he was very sticky in cover. So I was enticed by him because you've seen the run of him going with the first team, and it makes anytime you see that you worry that is this because the Vikings don't have any good corners, or is it this because the rookie is good? And I can't guarantee he's gonna be good. He'll probably commit penalties if he starts there out as a rookie because bad habits die hard or die slowly. But I was impressed with the skills that showed on the screen, the movement skills that will translate to game day. I thought was encouraging. Certainly as a breath of fresh air after seeing Chandler Sullivan and his tight hips and lack of speed. So not that Mekhi Blackman's like a speedster either, but I think he puts himself in a position to be sort of, if not attached at the hip, trailing somebody or in a position to force the quarterback off his read. So that was encouraging for me. Anybody else you want to hit on the defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think of Caleb Evans, he played a limited number of snaps. I think it was only 10. He looked good out there. Like, he looked like he was sticky to coverage. There was, like, one or two plays where I thought he let up a little bit of much space underneath. Like, he played it a little bit safe deep. He was in cover 3 in those situations, so maybe you do want him to play it a little bit safe deep. And nothing ended up getting completed on him, I don't think. So really not a ton to complain about there. Andrew Booth had the one no on the Sluggo where he bit on it, and that is kind of a theme for him, right? Like, he bites pretty hard on stuff, and it's something we saw when he played last year, right? I think that was the Cowboys game, where he would just either he'd be playing way too soft or he'd be biting way too hard on something. So, camp reports haven't been glowing. They haven't been terrible for him. And, he was somebody we were both really excited about coming out of school. So I'm hoping that he can put it together more so. I thought he looked good outside of that. Like, there were a couple plays where he was very, very sticky in coverage. And, with guys running routes across the field or slant routes or routes that had, pretty hard breaks in them. So it was nice. It's just, you can't have those big mental errors where you're giving up a free touchdown. Right. So it's kind of that dichotomy with him.
You mentioned this, but I thought all his other reps were good.
Yeah.
But giving up a touchdown on 3rd and long is always going to be a giant black mark on your report card. I will say that was another throw where he just didn't have any time to recover. Obviously, you shouldn't bite on the slant or whatever, because he opened up his hips and then immediately it was, he was not in a position to recover. And as good as he was, he's a first round talent, even though he was taken early 2nd round. He's not the speedster to be able to recover immediately from that, but that was just another. I think that was still Drew Lock in the game at that point, even though it was a bit later on, probably after some of our listeners had turned the game off. But at that point, like, it was, I don't think there was anything Booth could have done after he gave up the slant. So, I mean, obviously, you don't want to give up a touchdown fade or whatever, but it was the sort of thing where were the throw not perfect or at least very good, I feel like Booth could have gotten a position to recover, but he never got that chance because it was just a great throw. So. There was more good than bad, I think, with Booth, even though that touchdown's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. Joejuan Williams or whoever,
yeah.
I thought he looked really good too. I mean, he had that fantastic pass breakup in the end zone at the end of the game. But I also thought he looked really stout in press. He was very physical. I don't think I saw him lose a rep. So that was encouraging to see from somebody who was kind of not really on my radar. And you saw him like starting with the ones, even though now it seems like Mekhi Blackman's kind of taking his place. But I don't know. It's against the Seahawks backups, but he looked good. I don't know. So
he always struck me on vibes as the guy that the new coach brings in to kind of help teach the system, and then by the end of camp, he's kind of out of there, right? Because he was a former 2nd round pick, but he's never stuck with any team, right? And he's crazy long, right? Like, I think he's 6'4" or something like that. And it's just absolutely absurd how big he is out on the field for a corner.
29, so it reminds me a lot of Rhodes. So
yeah, and he's wearing number 29. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, so the physicality was nice to see, and he was somebody I actually had off the 53-man roster because I was like, okay, he started camp with the ones. He got surpassed by Blackman in like less than a week. You can see where this downward trajectory is going. It's who was that Broncos wide receiver, Jordan Taylor, or somebody that we brought back in when we had Kubiak, where it's like, okay, this guy, he's our wide receiver 3. He's a wide receiver 3 all at camp, and like, then he's completely off of the team. I kind of figured it was going to be the same for Williams, but he might actually make it and be able to give a solid contribution. Like, obviously the physical traits are there, so hopefully, maybe he's turned a corner with his career. That's nice. One other player I wanted to shout out on the defensive line, somebody I was not expecting to shout out at all. I wasn't high on this guy, but I thought Ross Blacklock had a solid handful of plays. Like, he was standing up opposing offensive linemen at the line of scrimmage. He made a couple tackles. I think I got pressure, but I was impressed with his run defense, right, which is not supposed to be really the hallmark of his game. But I noted a handful of plays where I thought he played pretty well. So anybody else on the defense you want to give a shout out, Nick?
Basically, all the interior defensive linemen, I have zero
Yeah.
worries about. Like they're all when they weren't out there very long, but just basically, I have a very high opinion of Chris Rumph. I thought Tonga was,
Mm-hmm.
it was eating up double teams. There were multiple plays where you mentioned Blacklock, who I also thought snuffed out two, I think, screens when nobody else was snuffing them
Yes.
out. So I thought that was really encouraging to see. Looked like a veteran. Jonathan Bullard had some really stout run stops, or just like not moving an inch on like zone plays where they're trying to get him to move. So I was the fact that these are our backups. I mean, Tonga might start as a nose guard, but the fact that a lot of these guys were our backups and they were just like when you had like those bare fronts out there, there was really not much to go out there with the starters were out there. So I was encouraged by all those guys, Bullard, Tonga, and Pat Jones when he was in there at the
Yep.
three tech position. So I mean, all those guys I thought impressive run fits.
Yeah, on the first 5 plays for a defense, I had a positive note for Bullard, a positive note for Tonga, and a positive note for Pat Jones on like the first 5 plays of the game, right? So that's pretty good from your interior defensive line, when you see that sort of stuff. So no, really good stuff there. I mean, there weren't like once we got into the third and fourth quarter, there weren't a ton of guys in the front seven who I was particularly impressed by. Curtis Weaver had a couple nice rushes. Ben Whitley or whatever had a nice rush, but I don't think any of those guys, unfortunately, are really going to sniff the 53-man roster. So why don't we move it over to the offensive side of the ball, Nick? And, we got to look at a couple different things. Obviously, the Vikings brought in, an extra tight end and Josh Oliver. We got to see him. We got to see kind of maybe some different plans for the run game in this offense. Give me your overall offensive impressions. Obviously, we're going to get into players then, but what are your overall impressions from the offense? Anything different from last year with the Kevin O'Connell offense?
We saw a lot more two tight end sets than I was used to seeing, so that was good. And I feel like when you go back and you look at you do an autopsy of the 2022 Vikings, I think you'd be surprised by how bad the run game was, especially when
Mm-hmm.
you think about like they have Brian O'Neill, they have Christian Darrisaw, they have these Pro Bowler level blockers up front, not to mention C.J. Ham, who's a good blocker as a fullback with his versatility, and T.J. Hawkinson, maybe don't, he's not renowned for his putting guys in the dirt, but I do think he's an effective zone blocker, and he's very multiple. He's a Pro Bowler at least as a receiver. So, um, and Dalvin Cook, who he's obviously no longer a Viking, but they had the ingredients on paper to have a very effective rushing attack, and then they were like they had the third worst EPA per rush, might have even been second worst or something. So
Yep.
I feel like they spent a lot of time this offseason being like, how do we fix that? And Josh Oliver was a big part of that. But also extending CJ Ham, and so you're starting to see it all. And Johnny Mundt, continues to get a lot of praise. I think we're going to see not just 12 but 13 personnel, a decent amount, because Johnny Mundt's a pretty good tight end too. So I think you're going to see. I guess you saw how they're going to mix things up a little bit more and not just live and breathe 11 personnel the Sean McVay way. They're going to try and branch out a little bit more to more of the Kyle Shanahan flavor. And so I thought that the way they mixed it up in the run game was good and impressive. And I liked the way, I mean, it's still kind of the Shanahan McVay mid zone, wide zone scheme, but they
Mm-hmm.
mixed up and they brought in some counter, they brought in some power, they brought in some duo. So it wasn't just the same old, we don't have an off speed pitch to go with our fastball. So that was encouraging. And obviously, especially when Ty Chandler was on the field, you saw some really encouraging results in the run game, even if they were giving up hits in the backfield. I think Seahawks they play not only very stout defense, but they're also, I feel like they've built their offense to combat wide zone,
Yep.
especially with everybody they got in there. They're used to seeing that a lot. So they're a defense that bases out of bare fronts and stuff, and that bare fronts are very good at stopping zone runs. So maybe the fact that I shouldn't gas up the run offense too much, given how much Ty Chandler was getting hit near the line of scrimmage, but I think I see the pieces there for when the starters are out there. I have
Mm-hmm.
more encouragement about how the run game is going to go. offensively, pass game, they didn't do anything too crazy, but I think the story of the game in the passing offense is probably Jordan Addison looking amazing. So I was overall pretty excited by what I saw. What do you think, Matt,
Yeah,
about
I
it?
mean, I think all three receivers who were starting, right, Addison, Powell, and Reagor looked very good. But like you said, I don't think there was anything that I wasn't expecting in the passing game. The run game, they mixed it up with some power. Both there were two power reps where they just were not on the same page as an offensive line. Like one, I think it was Brandel who was pulling, ran directly into Josh Oliver, and it completely killed the play. So I'm hoping that that's not a symptom of the entire offensive line, particularly the starters, and they kind of have it more buttoned down than the backups do in terms of their spacing, because there were two or three plays on power where it was like, all right, you guys either don't practice this all that much, or you just aren't all that good at going, at pulling in particular, like whatever player is doing it. There was also some tight end or pre-snap motion with like a fullback or sort of thing, right? CJ Ham, who's the only fullback on the roster, didn't play in the game, but they used Ben Simmons, I think it was 89, I think, as kind of a puller and some of that fullback stuff, which I want to give Luke Braun credit from Locked On Vikings, who's been hammering, that we're going to do more Shanahan run concepts in terms of how we move the fullback pre-snap and that sort of stuff, like fullback lead stuff, for our run game, which is part of outside zone. It can be part of power or counter too, depending on the play call. But I think we're gonna see more of that stuff in the run game. So overall, our offensive architecture, a more varied run game. And I think part of the reason the run game was bad last year, right? We've got the ingredients, but Kevin O'Connell, a first time head coach and a first year head coach, is trying to install his offense, and being quarterback, typically those guys come from a passing game oriented perspective, right? And they're pretty light on the run game. So when you're in training camp and stuff, you have a limited amount of time to install all your stuff. And, the way anything works is you get out more from what you practice than you don't. So I bet the Vikings spent a lot of time last year going over the passing game stuff and pass protection, and we're kind of a little bit light on the run game stuff. And we've seen an additional investment to that this offseason that is hopefully going to improve the run game. Because when you only have a handful of plays, or you haven't practiced it as much as you've practiced the passing game, you're just not going to execute as well. And we saw a lot of poor execution, I think, last year, or uninspired play calling, like inside zone and that sort of stuff, that just doesn't really help you overall as a run game, right? It's like the inside zone is like the offensive coordinator doesn't know what to do on this play, so they're just going to spam inside zone. So with that rant out of the way there, why don't we get in the offense? I felt like kind of throughout this game, Ty Chandler felt like the engine in the offense, right? He made a couple of nice plays on checkdowns for me. He looked explosive running, right? He looked very explosive. He looked good after contact. There were a couple times he took on direct contact, kind of bounced off of it and got extra yards. There was one play where I was shocked how he got through the hole when you look at it on the end zone angle. Like, he basically ducked under the line and got 3 or 4 more yards. I think there was actually a holding call on that play. But so it ended up getting called back. In the passing game, it was an effective dump off option. He caught the ball, turned upfield, got a couple first downs there. The overall numbers for the rushing, like, he only ended up with 3 or so rushing yards per attempt, but he was regularly getting hit at the line of scrimmage, as we've talked about. So I was pretty impressed with him. In pass protection, there was one cut block I thought he didn't execute very well. He wasn't asked to be a stand-up pass protector a ton, but there was one where he picked up a blitz very impressively against a blitzing linebacker, took him head on, completely stonewalled him. So I thought that was all pretty promising information from what I saw from Ty Chandler. Anything to add there, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the elusiveness is probably what stuck out the most. I think was wound up with four forced missed tackles on just like 15 touches, which is a very high rate.
Yes, it's crazy.
That was really encouraging to see. But also, the fact that he looked comfortable in all three phases, I was impressed by him as a pass blocker. It wasn't perfect, but I was not expecting him to do anything there. And he not only got in the way a lot, but he also, I think, snuffed out some pass rush attempts. So. But obviously, very smooth as a receiver, very good at converting, kind of knew the soft spots in the zones and knew how to immediately cut upfield to make the most of his yards after contact opportunities. And his vision as a runner was better than I was expecting it to be. He was kind of able to set up his blockers a little bit and pick the right hole in the zone. So this is a big question facing the Vikings right now. And I think it contrasts with Dwayne McBride, who I think was pretty disappointing.
Yeah,
And
I
he's a
agree.
rookie, a late round rookie, so you can't necessarily put too much stock into it. And he was working with terrible, fourth string offensive linemen out there. But Dwayne McBride, I think, was pretty disappointing in a lot of different ways. Ty Chandler looked like, hey, this could be he could be a very important part of the Alexander Madison committee now that we're living in life after Dalvin Cook. So it was encouraging to see Chandler be able to step up and make the most of his opportunities. So that was great to see.
Yeah, on McBride a little bit. Like I think that the clear difference, and you could see it watching the game just live, is Chandler has so much more juice than he does. And
Yeah.
that was my big question with McBride. Does he have the explosiveness to catch at the NFL level? And part of it was poor blocking. Like the second half, the offensive line couldn't do anything at all, either in the run game or in pass protecting, right, Jaren Hall. But there were a couple misreads I thought from McBride. One where he tried to bounce it, where he really should have cut it back up the middle. Um, and one other that I'm forgetting the exact details of right now. But like I didn't think he had an impressive game, and by contrast, I agree with you. I thought Chandler was very impressive. So to me, in the absence of Kene Wongwu, who we don't know where he's at, I wouldn't expect
Yeah.
Wongwu to be an advanced running back at this point, given that he hasn't really shown that throughout his career so far. I'm I'm getting pretty comfortable with Chandler as RB2, which was not something I went into the offseason thinking I was going to do. But like you said, the pass protection was way more impressive than I thought it was, and that was my biggest question with him. The other big question is like running in between the tackles, I guess, and I thought he did a better job than that than I would have expected as well in this game. So overall, pretty positive on him. Let's flip it over to the wide receivers, and I'll give you the floor here for the first one, Nick. Jordan Addison. What did we think? I mean, we only got 10 snaps, but boy, a couple of those were fun, huh?
Yeah, I mean, really impressive stuff. He had technically only one catch, which
Yes, technically.
was a poorly thrown ball by Nick Mullens on the crosser, but he did a great job adjusting to it and making sure he got the catch. He had hit him in stride. I think Addison could have had probably another 10 plus yards after the catch, maybe even more. But instead, he was able to adjust to the ball really well. Granted, he was pretty open. It's one of those, when those crossing routes get open and you find the hole in the zone, it's not a hard play to make, but it was nice to see the adjustment, the ability to reel in the catch. And then obviously there was the toe tap sideline, Chris Carter flashback, toe drag swag that he pulled off on a similar crossing route, which was obviously called incomplete, but replay showed clearly he got both feet
Mm-hmm.
down. And not no question about it, the palps going up from both of his feet there in the dirt. So that was a really impressive play. I mean, we've heard about that kind of all camp about the plays he's able to make, the sideline grabs, the end zone grabs, but the fact that he was able to do that out there in a real game and for us to be able to see it on the big screen was a lot of fun. So not a ton of snaps from Addison, but very encouraging stuff what we did see, and you can immediately see how he's going to slot in and be able to sort of juice this offense where it was maybe lacking some of that and having a sort of a counter punch to Justin Jefferson, who was the most doubled wide receiver in the NFL. So the potential for Addison to be able to shake guys loose, get open, and make those impressive catches downfield, I think has the potential to really elevate the passing offense, which is awesome. It's what you want to see out of your first rounder.
Yeah, that route on that catch, or that non-catch that was really a catch, was awesome too. Like the way he is able to cut and gear down and make a flat break out of that route was really impressive. There were a couple other. There was one where it was a backside dig, and I think the ball ended up getting checked down, or there was pressure or something. But he got open on that. It was a very clean route. I thought he did a good job. He did have one contested catch that got knocked out, but it was the player hit him as soon as the ball got there. Like it would take a special receiver, and it's just not his style, right? He's not a huge guy. He's not going to win with that sort of contested catch all the time. So that is what we signed up for drafting him, right? The guy who's going to get open, feeding off of JJ's gravity, right? And I think there's nothing in this game that told me he's not going to be able to do that, right? Like that catch or non-catch or whatever you want to call it went viral because it was a phenomenal catch, right? Like, I think everybody in the NFL who watches that, not just Vikings fan, is like, oh yeah, he got both toes down, and that is absolutely a catch. It's a shame that it didn't count. So, honestly, though, the other two wide receivers who I kind of have competing for the fifth wide receiver spot right now, right? We're expecting JJ, KJ, Jordan Addison, and Jalen Naylor, who's injured right now, to be kind of roster locks for this team, and that's really what it sounds like. And I only kept 5 players on my initial 53, so the choice was down between Brandon Powell and Jalen Reagor. And they both made that choice very difficult for me. I was really impressed by Reagor, who was somebody I was obviously, and I don't think anybody was impressed with him as a Viking last year, right? I thought Reagor was regularly getting open. He had a nice toe tap catch against the sideline. He had a great catch where he got absolutely walloped after it and held on to the football. I think he had like 5 catches for 51 yards or something like that throughout the game. I thought he looked crisp running routes, which is not something I saw so much last year. And he even helped a guy get lined up on one play, right? Which is something that you love to see from a player whose biggest moments last year were causing 2 interceptions in the Colts game because he slid on a curl route where Kirk wanted him to sit down and stay in the same spot, and he gave up on a deep route, right? Like, this guy was mentally not in it with the Vikings. And granted, it was probably difficult for him last year. Getting traded right before the season, you have to learn an entirely new offense. You're kind of thrown in there. You're not getting a ton of practice time because you're not a starter, right? So there's probably not a lot of attention paid to you. You kind of have to do the work on your own. Maybe you're not getting up to that standard that you need to be to understand everything that's going on in the offense. So maybe with a full offseason, that has helped him a little bit and kind of driven him along here. What did you think of Reagor, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, clearly you saw the juice there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everything you mentioned is the athletic ability, the speed was never the question with Reagor. The question was, um, does he have the details down fine enough to actually be able to execute the offense and do his job? And that was the problem with him last year. And this year, it's just one preseason game, but he was our leading receiver, and he was getting the small stuff right in a way that he wasn't last year. And like you said, maybe that's to be expected for a guy who was traded before the season, didn't fully have time to acclimate himself. But I guess it's easy to get excited about Reagor because we have this very highly regarded wide receivers coach and Keenan McCardle, and you give him a first round talent, moldable ball of clay and Jalen Reagor and say, hey, maybe this can be a redemption story. I'm not saying that started yet, but if it had, it would look a lot like this first game where he was doing the small things right. He was lining up in the right places. He was executing the routes in the right way. He wasn't winning just on downfield go balls, but he was winning on crossers and on all different. He was winning on the full route tree, and you saw crisp routes out of him. Not just I'm going to win with speed, but I'm going to win it with my route breaks too. So all that was really encouraging. Again, this is a guy who was kind of brought in more to be a punt returner and was bad at that. Fumbled a lot, muffed a lot of punts. And anything you got out of him as a wide receiver is kind of just gravy. But we saw a lot of gravy in this preseason game. So, again, don't want to get myself too excited about somebody who right now might even be on the outside looking in on the roster. But like I said, if this is the start of the Jalen Reagor redemption story, this is what it would start to look like in my mind. So that was fun to see.
Yeah, and the guy he's competing directly with, Brandon Powell, I thought also had a great game. So that's kind of what makes it difficult. Is Powell had what? It was another 5 receptions for maybe it was 40 something yards. I forget what the exact statistics are, but there were a couple of nice catches that he made in terms of adjustments or through contact, and then after the catch, it looked like he had juice as well. So, do you have any further notes on Powell, Nick, other than just to acknowledge that he looked very good?
Yeah, look good. The routes were more. I was impressed by his route running. I was not. I guess
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a long list of notes on Powell the way that you do out of a former first round talent, but um, I thought he looked like an intriguing slot option, especially with the way he was able to set up his routes and sort of separate at the top of his routes, set them up. So he looked like a veteran route runner, and I think that's a very good thing to see is from somebody, especially somebody who gives you some special teams ability as well. So. It's a good problem to have, but I think it's going to be a tough decision whether they keep 6 wide receivers and cut somebody else somewhere else, or if they go with 5 and who's on the chopping block between Reagor and Powell, assuming Naylor is healthy enough to make it and we don't see any other shocks or anything.
Yep. And then let's flip it over to the biggest, well, besides Addison, the biggest investment, the biggest free agency investment the Vikings made on the offense this season. Josh Oliver, he got some run there early in the game. And I mean, the first play of the first run play of the game, he came out and he knocked a guy back like 5 or 6 yards down the field. And you're like, let's go. There was the one rep where I thought he got knocked back a little bit, and Blake Brandel ran into him on power, so that was a little bit of a negative. But that was also directly against a defensive lineman. There was one where Chandler got to the outside edge, where he completely controlled the defensive end and enabled Chandler to do that. I thought he was great in the run blocking game. We didn't see much from him in the pass game. Like, he didn't catch a pass, I think. I don't even know how often he was out running routes. I didn't really track him too much in that respect, but I was impressed with his run blocker. He kind of came in as advertised, with TJ Hawkinson on the other side. I think 2 tight end sets are going to be very fun for our run game at the very least this year.
Yeah, and he was winning run blocks, not just, I mean, we're a zone team, and he has some really impressive zone blocks, which look very different. But he also had pancake blocks and sort of more drive
Yep.
or climb power blocks as well. So, he came in and we brought him in and we paid him all this money to be like a high end tight end to blocking tight end, and you saw exactly that. And it's fun to see guys like kick ass in the run game. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's always gonna. The Christian Darrisaw highlights are going to be fun. I think Josh Oliver highlights this season are going to be really fun in the run game because he was just blowing dudes up. And in zone runs, he was getting pieces of multiple guys and setting up explosive runs. So he was doing a lot, and it was great to see. I think that's going to have the potential to really be a game changer in the run game. We talked about a little bit about how do we fix the run game. I think Oliver is kind of he's not the only piece, but I think in my mind he's the biggest new piece that will unlock the run offense and hopefully allow it to be a lot more efficient than it was last year. And we saw exactly how with how well he was doing as a run blocker. They didn't ask him to do a lot as a pass catcher. It's funny, Josh Oliver I think was drafted more based on his pass
Yes.
catching ability than on his blocking ability, and so it's funny for him to have turned into like a road grader. But they were doing a lot of the standard McVay kind of flavor with the choice looky type stuff. So he was that guy doing those little
Mm-hmm.
pivot routes from the slot and stuff. And it wasn't like the most impressive thing in the world, but your tight end 2 is probably going to be what your 4th or 5th read in the passing game. So I'm not too like that's not why you signed him. But I do think he'll probably give you some juice there.
Yeah.
But you signed him for the run blocking, and so it was awesome to see him deliver on that and more in his first game with some really fun run blocking highlights. So that was good to see.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to give it. I think he clearly gives us more than Johnny Mundt does, like just from the athleticism standpoint in the passing game there, which, I thought Johnny Mundt played pretty well today, or in the game too. He was a good blocker. I think he caught a check down pass or something. I can't remember exactly what in the passing game. Nothing significant in the passing game, surely. But, looked good as a blocker. Nick Muse looked good as a blocker, made a fantastic catch for that touchdown. It's kind of an interesting battle there. It's like, okay, are the Vikings going to keep 4 running backs? That's what I had them keeping. I had them keeping Chandler and McBride. Wangwu obviously is the kick returner, but, do we need to keep him as well? What's his injury status? And then Madison. But that left me with only 5 wide receivers, right, and only 3 tight ends. Well, even if I want to cut one of those running backs now, I want to keep 6 wide receivers and I want to keep 4 tight ends, right? So it's just some of the ways the players on the fringe played in this game make you have difficult thoughts on roster decisions for the Vikings, and I think that's a good thing for the team overall, right? You want to have a bunch of guys who are playing at a highly competitive level here.
Yeah. What do you think about the quarterbacking?
Uh, Nick Mullens just isn't that interesting to me, frankly. Like, I thought he was fine. He generally made good decisions. Maybe he held onto the ball a little bit too much a couple times, like he double clutched a couple throws. But like, I don't really care. Like, he's never gonna win the starting job from Kirk Cousins, right? So it's like we're gonna want a guy like his role is to help Kirk Cousins in the quarterback room mentally prepare for the game every week. And if Kirk does get hurt, try to steady the ship and run an efficient offense or whatever you want to call it, or like not make mistakes on the offense. And I don't think he turned the ball over. I think from that perspective, he was fine to me, right? Like he delivered the ball to the receivers who were making great plays, right? And it wasn't always perfect, with the example of the Addison being there. Maybe that toe tap catch, you get it a little bit closer to the sideline or whatever, and it doesn't become a question mark in the ref's head or something like that. But, I thought we got what we expected. Jaren Hall, obviously, being a rookie, is way more interesting. I thought it was hard to evaluate, just based on the pass protection that he was been giving. Like, he was running for his life, and I don't think he was necessarily unwarrantedly running for his life. Like, in most of the cases, he was directly under duress. There was the nice back shoulder throw to N'Keal Harry, who we haven't talked about. Like, N'Keal Harry to me only makes the team if the Vikings are like, all right, we want a big body contested catch receiver because we don't have that skill set. Which just use TJ Hawkinson for that. Thank you. I'll take my paycheck now. But no, sorry, I got off on a tangent. He had that nice back shoulder throw. There were a couple quick game throws where he was inaccurate, which I'm a little bit concerned about. Just because that's a mechanical thing, and I thought it was extremely accurate at BYU. So maybe his head's swimming a little bit getting in his first game, and he just wasn't as clean as he could be. But other than that, it was really just tough for him to get anything going at all. And even when he was getting outside of the pocket, there was a man chasing him down right away, so he couldn't really get anything down the field. When he was scrambling, there wasn't any receivers uncovering down the field either. So it was just a thing after the other where I can't really evaluate him. I didn't love his game, but it just kind of is what it is at this point.
It was rough watching the broadcast tape. I think the All-22 was a little bit more exonerating, but it was a poor debut for Hall, even if you grade him on a curve, which I think you should, considering he's out there with third, fourth stringers that he probably has zero chemistry with. That's a hard role to be thrust into. But like you said, the accuracy issues are concerning. You'd want to see him operate the offense a little more efficiently, and you would also want to see him not just sort of fold under pressure. Like, he didn't get anything done under pressure. So. Yeah. That was, I guess, a little disappointing. I liked Nick Mullens' game a lot. It was boring is a fair way to describe it. I feel bad for him because he just does not have an NFL caliber arm. But if he did, he could be like a pretty good starting quarterback in the NFL.
He could be like Kirk Cousins.
Exactly. He executes he knows the system. He gets it. He executes it well. He's got some mobility. He's not the most accurate passer, but he's not the most inaccurate passer. So he does a lot of things right. He's kind of like a perfect backup quarterback because he just doesn't have the talent to threaten for a job. But like, if something happened to Kirk, I don't think your season would be immediately tank for Caleb. Maybe you would want it to, but I don't think you would necessarily have to go there immediately because I do think he would be capable of not losing you games out there, which is more than a lot of backup quarterbacks. I liked watching Nick Mullens. I thought he just in like a Case Keenum kind of way. I mean, different, but like in the way that like he brings something to the table and he doesn't have a lot of arm strength, but I like his gumption and I feel like he executes everything really well. So maybe I have such low expectations after enduring the Kellen Monds of the world, but it was good to see not totally sucky backup quarterback out there for the Vikings. So.
Yeah, I will say Jaren Hall, not a great game, not a Kellen Mond level bad game, right? Not a Kellen Mond first play, has never seen a double A gap blitz in his life, throws it right into the linebacker's hands type of situation. Or throwing an interception to Chaz Surratt in the Hall of Fame game. Two wonderful Vikings names in that sentence right there. But one last, actually, let's go back. Anything else on the offense? Anybody you wanted to shout out or anything you wanted to talk about there?
I thought, we harped on him for that pulling play on power, but I thought Blake Brandel, they moved him inside to guard. Yep. I thought he looked clearly the best offensive lineman on the team.
Clearly.
The fact they might have something with him there, moving him inside to guard. I thought Brandel was a good swing tackle last year, but maybe they're comfortable with Udo. I'm not sure why they are, because Udo, I have questions with him. But Brandel at guard, I thought played really well and was clearly the best offensive lineman. So I don't think I'm not saying anybody's job is in danger, but I liked what I saw from Brandel. The fact that he's now a guard, I think, is intriguing to me. So we'll see where that goes with that.
Yeah, to me, I think it's more they feel better about their tackles than they do about the rest of their interior offensive line, which when Ed Oliver was in, he had that play where it was a miscommunication or whatever, where he let the free rusher at Mullens, but otherwise he looked fine. behind that, like Alan Ali is just not it, unfortunately. But I think they're kind of
It's
cross
kind of sad.
training.
A lot of these preseason games, like you get guys out there getting
Yeah,
snaps, like Kalen Barnes on defense, and it was just like,
yeah,
this guy.
yeah.
I'm
I
sorry,
think
man.
Brandel is kind of like the six offensive lineman in the sense, not in like jumbo packages or whatever, but in the sense that if our left tackle goes down, he's in. If our right tackle goes down, he's in. If our left guard goes down or our right guard goes down, he's the first one in. You know, I don't know if he can snap the ball, but if he can, he's probably going at center too for Bradbury, right? But I think they would play him over Udo or Lowe, who I wasn't really impressed with either Udo or Lowe in this game. I mean, Udo had some highlights. Lowe, I didn't think looked great at all. Like there were a couple plays where he seemed slow out of his stance to me. So that's a problem in pass protection. Which is definitely a question mark, right? Like we had good offense. Well, we had okay offensive line health last year, right? Darisaw missed a couple games, but he came back. Obviously, O'Neal got hurt in the very last game of the year, or very close to the end of the year. Bradbury maybe missed a game or two, but Cleveland and Ingram played all 17, I believe, and only a handful of missed games across the entire offensive line. That's not something you see every year in the NFL, right? Obviously, we're very familiar with offensive linemen getting injured and missing significant amounts of time. So hopefully that doesn't happen for this team, because I think, Udo's proven to be an okay, like a serviceable player, but he's certainly not somebody you want starting for 13 games or whatever, right? If a guy goes down early in the season. So, it's definitely a question mark there for me.
Yeah.
So let's flip it over. One other player we got to mention. I'm sorry. And by the way, I did not see the Jaren Hall thing live. I went to bed at 11 p.m. because I have a job. And I was like, you know what? I'll get the All-22 later. I'll get some sort of replay, because I was kind of shocked that we actually got the All-22. Usually you're not able to get that for preseason. But Najee Thompson on special teams. How about that dude, man? Like, he's another one where it's like, I didn't have him on my 53-man roster, but I guarantee you that guy is going to make the team, because he's just going to be the special teams ace for this roster.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was really impressive stuff he was doing out there. So that's how you make the roster. It's even if you don't do anything else, like that kind of special teamer is going to endear you to everybody on the team and everybody in the coaching staff. So Najee Thompson, I think, earned a roster spot more than anyone else with this game.
Yeah. One last topic I had, because we haven't really done any podcasts since camp. Obviously, neither Nick, Greg, nor I live in Minnesota, so it's kind of, not really easy to do direct camp stuff. There's been a lot of other great sources covering the camp stuff. It would kind of feel weird to, basically do a podcast reporting on what's happening in camp. But from the highlights and everything, man, Justin Jefferson just looks so good. And it's kind of a reminder of how lucky we are as Vikings fans to have him on the team, right? Like, and just all the extra stuff, right? Like the Madden 99 stuff, that's awesome. All the media stuff that he's done, like, he's just such a polished player on and off the field. It's crazy.
Yeah, we have the best wide receiver in the NFL, which is we are lucky to be Vikings fans because that's not the first time it's happened. So, pray he, wrap him in bubble wrap and pray he makes it healthy this year, and maybe this is the year for JJ2K. But yeah, just he wins like every rep, which is just he's so good at so many things and all the little things, but also all the big things. So he's just stuff like that is like whatever whatever sense of like, oh man, the Vikings are back. I'm gonna really put myself through this and ruin every Sunday to just put all my energy into the Vikings every year. Like all that washes away once you remember, hey, we're privileged enough to get to watch Justin Jefferson every Sunday. So that's real. That's one of the great blessings of being a Vikings fan, despite all the heartbreak and all the lack of wins and Super Bowls and everything else. So that has me amped.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, this was awesome. It was great to get to chop it up with you again. It's been a minute. I mean, I know you've been super busy, so it's just been a pleasure going through this. It was great to have tape to watch again, right? Like I got through watching all the college prospects, and then there was like a month where I was like, I don't really know what to do with myself in the Viking Spear right now. I guess I'm going to try to follow training camp reports as much as I can. But it was a great to kind of get our hands on that tape and get that practice in. So I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football on Twitter. You can find him, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL on X. Whatever you want to call it these days, I suppose. Kindred Skulls is the name of the podcast. We are also available on Twitter at Kindred Skulls. We're available on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Any closing thoughts before we head out of here, Nick?
Nope. Skull.
Yeah, Skull. Goodbye. We love you.
Bye, we love you.
Goal, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.